We call it
Expedition Truth.
and we know you're going to love it. You ready now?
Somewhere, among the many competing voices in the world, truth is just waiting to be discovered. So sit back, open your mind to a world beyond your imagination. A world where truth never fears questions. Welcome to Expedition Truth with your host, Jack Ashcraft.
Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, wherever you happen to be. Welcome to the program. We apologize for coming on a couple of minutes late. We're having some audio difficulties with our guest, so we're trying to get those ironed out and get the ball rolling here for you. Tonight, we are going to be discussing a rather sensitive topic, I think. We're talking about Adolf Hitler, and that is a sensitive topic. This guy is probably the most notorious man to ever live in human history, and he is comparable to Joseph Stalin, who was also a notorious mass murderer. But Adolf Hitler seems to get the most attention in our culture, and it's probably because of the racial tones that were very much a part of National Socialism. When you think about Adolf Hitler, the first thing that comes to mind is, of course, jackbooted SS soldiers marching through the streets of Berlin, or probably stormtroopers, the brown shirts, their swastika armbands and banners, trashing windows and beating up Jews and anybody who gets out of line in the city streets of Munich. These are the images that are burned into the human mind whenever we hear the name Adolf Hitler. And one of the things that I think has been lost in the 21st century is the true nature of National Socialism and Adolf Hitler. The political alignment, certainly. If you are a conservative, you have undoubtedly at some point been compared to Hitler or to the Nazis, as if National Socialists were right-wing, which they weren't. Historically speaking, as they were understood in their own time, they were a leftist revolutionary movement. They were not right-wing. They were National Socialists. They believed in harnessing the fervor of those who really believed in the fatherland, nationalism, along with what they saw as the best that socialism had to offer. This was not a right-wing movement. Similarly, anybody who has been involved in apologetics ministry for any length of time will inevitably come up against the claim that Hitler was a Christian. You see this most often from atheists. They love to tout the line that Hitler was a Christian. My guest tonight is J.P. Holding. He is the author of Hitler's Christianity. J.P., welcome to the program.
Hi, Jack. Thanks for having me on today.
So, give our listeners a little bit of a background, if you will, on the Third Reich's approach to Christianity. It was pretty aggressive, was it not?
It was very aggressive, and it was also a more or less self-defined form of Christianity that was designed to serve their purposes rather than any sort of authentic faith derived from the first century. Essentially, they remade Christianity in their own image and likeness, and tried as much as possible to remove elements that they disagreed with, such as the Jewishness of Jesus and the Jewishness of the Bible.
and they termed this, if I'm not wrong, they termed this positive Christianity, didn't they?
Yeah, positive Christianity was the term that was used by Hitler, and it's come today to refer to the brand of Christianity that they came up with. And if it were around today, we would regard it as a cult.
Mm-hmm. Now, they even had a church, didn't they? The Reichschurch?
They had a set of churches that were aligned with positive Christianity, and mostly in the Protestant realm, that followed the teachings of positive Christianity. I wouldn't say that they had like a denomination as we would know it, but they had churches that were formally aligned with positive Christianity.
Mm-hmm. Now, I've read that they replaced on their altars, they replaced the Bible with copies of Mein Kampf. Is that correct?
That I didn't find any evidence for, but they did come up with their own version of the Bible. It wasn't used as much as we might think, but it was essentially a Bowdlerized version with many Jewish parts cut out of it. They didn't care for the Gospel of Matthew. They didn't care for much of the Old Testament. They didn't care for some of Paul's letters. In order to make it seem more authentic, they would have to stick with the original Christian book, the Bible. But they made excuses for why this part didn't belong or that part didn't belong, and essentially made it their own.
So, Adolf Hitler, yeah, as I was saying in my intro, I've been involved in apologetics for a number of years now, and mostly when I'm dealing with atheists, sometimes leftists, and they tend to be the same, one and the same most often, it's inevitable. They're going to use the line, Hitler was a Christian. So let's hit that. Was Hitler a Christian?
Only in the sense that I have noted that he was a cultic Christian. I mean, if you want to call that kind of Christianity Christian, then you might as well open the door for just about anything else to be Christian, including Hinduism. Of course, people can apply the label any way they want, but if you have to make a comparison to the historic Christian faith of the first century, there's simply no match between what Hitler believed and what the first century church believed, or even the modern American church believes to this day. He completely Bowdlerized the faith and made it his own, just like I was saying that Bible they had was their own. And he adjusted everything according to what he wanted to see in it. So, for example, he believed that Jesus was not Jewish. He had no notion that Jesus was Jewish. Rather, he made him into a member of the master race.
So Jesus was a blonde-haired, blue-eyed Aryan?
More or less, yes. That's how it would work out.
Yeah, that's quite ahistorical, I'd say.
In fact, I have a quote exactly, an explicit statement I just found. I can imagine Christ as nothing other than blonde and with blue eyes.
Yeah, that pretty much Aryanizes him, doesn't it?
Yes, it does.
Now, are you familiar with Hitler's table talk?
I am familiar with the table talk, yes.
Okay, there is discussion in there on Christianity and other religions as well. And it seems to me that I recall that the only positive things that Hitler had to say in these private discussions were really about Islam.
I did not look into his statements on Islam. There were a few statements on Christianity in table talk. It is a good source, but it has to be used with some caution, because it was at the very end of his life when he was looking back on his failures. I mean, he was in the bunker, basically, about to see the end of his life and the end of the empire he hoped would be. And to some extent, he was very disappointed in the way that the church had failed him. And so while we see quite a lot of anti-Christian talk in there, we have to keep in mind that he's at this point where everything has failed him, and so he's going to be more stronger in his denunciations than he might have been in life. And to that extent, you do see some very strong statements in table talk that don't reflect things he said earlier.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I can see that, because we're looking at these discussions taking place closer toward the end of the war, actually.
Yes.
Is it true then that the Roman Catholic Church worked with the National Socialists in their persecution of Jews? Because that's another trope we see often.
I didn't see any clear evidence of that. And even though some have said, well, he was a convinced Catholic and that he made a statement that he was a Catholic, you have to remember he was also a politician. He was going to say whatever he wanted to say. That much is commonly noted about Hitler, and it remains true even with careful study. The Catholic Church did what they could within Germany. Of course, it was mainly a Protestant nation at the time, the home of Luther. But I didn't find any evidence that Catholicism in any way conspired with Hitler to suppress the Jews or to oppress them or to murder them in any particular way. No, I didn't find anything to suggest that.
I think the only evidence that I've seen has been from some of the released intelligence files since the end of World War II about some priests helping Nazi war criminals escape Germany. I think that's pretty much a open and shut case on that. I mean, the documentation is all over the place on that one. But that, I don't think it's fair to level that the accusation that the Catholic Church helped Nazis escape to the entirety of the church. I think we're looking at rogue clerics doing that sort of work more than anything. Was there any sort of organized resistance on the part of Christians to National Socialism?
I would say there was anything particularly organized. You had a few isolated figures who stood up to it and made their voices heard, stood up to Hitler, and spoke against him personally. But there was not an organized movement. There was maybe a small number of people who were standing up against him. But yeah, it never really. There was one plot to assassinate him that they were one of them was partly involved in, but nothing I could call a systematic response to Hitler or systematic opposition to Hitler, like a movement, you might say. Individual churches and pastors, yes.
Yeah, so like a Bonhoeffer sort of thing.
Yes, Bonhoeffer is the classic example that you can appeal to. And there were just a few others that were in that mix as well.
Mm-hmm. So in your research, did you find out anything about what the real spiritual values of National Socialism were, if they had any?
If you want to call them spiritual values, you would have to say it amounted to an emphasis on works and deeds. And aside from the very basic thing we mentioned earlier about turning Jesus into an Aryan rather than a Jew, there was less emphasis placed on doctrine and more emphasis placed on action. I'd like to say that doctrine was ignored to the point of annihilation. It was a matter of indifference in positive Christianity.
One of the things I would like to explore a bit with you. You're an apologist, if I'm not mistaken. I think that's what your ministry is, correct?
That is correct.
Okay. One of the things I'd like to explore with you a bit is how Christians can respond to racism, anti-Semitism, how they can respond intelligently, because I think most get flabbergasted, get stunned with the accusations of racism, or even with racist comments within our own ranks, because it does crop up every now and then. So I'd like to kind of probe your mind a bit, if you don't mind, about how we should respond to that. So, for example, how should Christians respond to something like the Protocols of the Learned Elders of Zion, that notorious piece of propaganda?
Yeah, well, if you don't have a trash burner handy for an immediate response, when it explore documents like that, and not just that one in particular, but there's others like it. To become knowledgeable in something like that without getting your mind a little dirty can be difficult. If you're going to study in depth, you have to learn a bit more about the process of forgeries, how they are made, how they are recognized, and how they come to be accepted as genuine and why. Really, they are just documents like that are tools of people who, in many cases, have already decided what they want to be true. And that's the first thing you need to recognize. The second thing you need to recognize is the key contexts that help refute the notions that are found in documents like that. And we'll use the example we were discussing of a dejudaized Jesus. And we have Hitler saying, well, I can't imagine him any other way but blonde and blue-eyed. The historic fact is that is not what Jesus would have looked like. And unfortunately, we do have some artistic representations, even our churches, that imagine Jesus as basically Caucasian, even if not blonde and blue-eyed. We have to recognize that Jesus would have been more in line with people that we see in Egypt or what we see in Palestine, the Middle East today. And these are the sort of contextual facts that are often missing from documents like the protocols. You will often find that documents like the protocols are full of historical errors, full of linguistic errors, but the average person isn't going to know the difference. Many people assume that after preaching a sermon, Jesus went down to McDonald's and bought a hamburger, but all those things did not exist. And but it's surprising how many people think that Jesus was just like a modern person and thought the same way they did. It takes a lot of diving into the ancient world and the ancient culture to understand why some of these documents are erroneous.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that can take some serious research.
Yes.
I mean, how long did it take you to research this book?
I was fortunate enough, it took less time than it might have because I was fortunate enough to be right near a Holocaust library here in Orlando. There's a Jewish school nearby in Maitland, Florida, that has an excellent Holocaust museum and an excellent Holocaust library. So I was able to get a lot of the books I needed right there instead of having to wait for them and research for them. I would say overall, this book took me about 9 months to put together.
Well, that's pretty serious research. 9 months, it's almost a year.
Yeah. I'm not saying I didn't eat during that time or do anything else, but it's as part of the process of getting all the books together. And fortunately, good college libraries nearby I had available. And thankfully, used books are very easy to get these days as well. But yeah, something like 9 months putting it all together.
What do you think was the most difficult part of the research?
Quite honestly, it was simply getting some of the more obscure sources. There were just a few that were hard to get. I had to do some special orders for them. Actually finding the information I needed once I had those sources in hand was not that difficult. And it was then just putting it together in a systematic way so that for people to understand it and recognize why some of these arguments that are so popular these days are wrong. I wouldn't say the topic was that difficult, but half the problem with people who believe in this kind of thing about Hitler being a Christian is convincing them that a refutation has taken place, even if you're quoting scholars who say that a refutation has taken place.
Yeah. I mean, my interaction with the people who offer up that trope is generally they're emotionally wedded to an opposition to Christianity, and so facts really don't matter as much as their emotions. They don't let facts interfere with fantasy in this case. We're up against a break here. We will be back after this with more.
Ashcraft, where the truth never fears questions.
Hey, welcome back. We are joined by J.P. Holdick, the author of Hitler's Christianity, and we're discussing, a lot of different things here that really spin off from the topic of National Socialism, Adolf Hitler, etc. We're talking about racism and racial issues. JP, do you see any significant racial issues in today's church?
I've been lately attending an Indonesian church, and so I've been into the Indonesian culture of late, learning a lot about that. But they have actually discussed, the reaction they get sometimes as Chinese or as Indonesian Christians, and sometimes it's like they feel like they're not as welcome sometimes, I'd say, and it's like they're not treated like exactly like the body of Christ, I'd say, sometimes by the typical American Christian. Why that is, I haven't explored the motives, but certainly I've seen examples of it. Racism or culturism is another way to put it, throughout the church. And since I've come to learn so much about the biblical culture and about the Indonesian culture, I'm particularly disturbed when I see things like that.
Yeah, I think more than anything, what we're looking at when that occurs, and I'm not discounting that there could be, a few individuals here and there who might harbor some sort of racial or ethnic aggressions. But I think most of the time it's really, it stems from a lack of knowledge about the culture, the language separation sometimes, and it just makes people uncomfortable. And I think that's really more what it stems from. But I'm not.
Yes.
I'm not going to discount the possibility of real racial hatred there. The issues that Christians face online, in particular with atheists and leftist-oriented individuals who attack Christianity on the basis of race, they're concerning to me because I don't think the church is adequately addressing those issues in its apologetics. Well, and I'm sure you would agree with this, I don't think the church really takes apologetics seriously enough. But when it comes to apologetics, I don't see the topic of race being dealt with, I think, in an honest way. And let me give you an example of what I think is a bit misguided. You have Answers in Genesis, who put out their book, I think it's called One Blood. And, they say we're one race, the human race. I agree with that wholeheartedly. We are. And we are all equal before our Creator in the economy of salvation and in the dignity of our person, created in the image of God. But I think Answers in Genesis goes a little too far in advancing that truth, because it is a truth, but they ignore the very real differences that exist between people groups and sort of want to whitewash it away by saying, well, we're all just one race. Yeah, that's great, we are. But how do we adequately address the differences without being offensive or dismissive?
Well, I think the example that comes to mind for me, and I'll speak from my experience attending this Indonesian church and appreciating the devotion I see, which shames the American churches that I've been to prior to that. Unlike so many of the Western churches today, they have a meal at the end of the service. I mean, a real meal. I mean, they will serve a whole bunch of food, and they will, everyone will sit down and enjoy it and have fellowship. It's a true supper, just like the first century church would have. And much of the food is from the Indonesian culture. And the best way to integrate myself to that, I ask questions. I say, okay, now what is this? And tell me about this dish. And I try some of it. I don't just act like it's something that's beneath me, which is, I think, an attitude that we unfortunately bring to different cultures when we approach them. I try some of it. I make sure there's some allergies that I have, and I have to make sure I don't cross up with those. But once I've established that I can eat it without any problem, I give it a try. And I've come to enjoy several of their dishes. And in fact, they have some. I like hot peppers.
So
and
do
they
I.
have some, yeah, they have some hot peppers that'll blow you away. And they also like ginger candy. In fact, my good friend gave me some ginger candies from them that they were very strong. And
That's
he
what
said,
I
I
like.
want to watch you eat one of these because they make me cry. And he's incredulous that I'm popping like 5 of these things in my mouth, and I'm not having any problem. So, we need to come to appreciate one another and appreciate the diversity. I guess the word that is most often used. Learn to appreciate the diversity and assign it value, and not be frightened of it, not be critical. Come to an understanding and do your research. Don't just assign a value judgment based on your surface impression, because as you said, everyone is made in the image of God, and they deserve the respect accorded to that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would agree. I think if we are not afraid to ask questions and respectfully, then
Exactly.
we can learn. And I think people are generally afraid to ask questions of somebody of another race or culture, because they fear that the question itself is going to be offensive. And I don't think that's the case. If you're genuinely trying to learn with the question and not just be callous.
Absolutely. Yeah, there's an inquisitive spirit that is the right way to approach it.
Now, another thing is you're probably familiar with critical race theory. And
No, I'm actually not.
Okay. I've done a little bit of research on it, did a video on it that is at my YouTube channel of the same name as this program, Expedition Truth Radio. And critical race theory basically says that Western Europeans, white people, are racist by nature, that there's nothing we can do to change that we were born racist, that it wasn't something we learn, it's not created by environment, it is just a part of our being. And there are even Christians who embrace this and use it to suggest that white people cannot be saved because they're white. Yes. Now, I've been called a racist under those conditions just because I'm white. I was told there's no way I cannot be racist. Now, my wife is not white. My son is mixed race. They knew that, and it didn't matter because of my birth, my very being. I'm ontologically evil by race. How would you respond to that?
You have a can of anti-insanity spray I can use. That's about all I can think of right now. For so many years, I began apologetics in 1998, and I specialized for many of those years in ideas that were insane. I'll give you an example that I used in the Hitler book. There's a book by someone named Cinda Godfrey called The Elvis Jesus Mystery, which declares that Elvis Presley was the Messiah and essentially a reincarnation or what have you of Jesus. Wow. Now, how in the world do you approach something like that, someone who believes something like that?
Yeah, that's a good question.
How in the world, how are you going to argue anyone out of something like that? Another example is the Roman Piso theory. This is something I've had a lot of atheists promote. It's the idea that the New Testament is like a special coded book, which is actually teaching things like the locations of brothels in the Roman Empire.
Wow.
what can you do with this? And in my earlier years, I devoted a lot of time to refuting such things in detail, and I enjoyed it. At this stage of the game, I'm just trying to teach those who want to learn rather than trying to refute those who don't care. We live in an age, and there's a book I review for the Christian Research Journal called The Death of Expertise, which talks about how experts today are given less and less respect, and how it's gone to the point where anyone who posts on a Facebook page is considered an expert by everyone else. Mm-hmm. In that kind of environment, what can you do to respond to ideas like this? You can't clean the other person's mind out of the presuppositions that lead them to believe nonsense like this. And so at this point, you go to those who are willing to listen and teach them the truth that you have, show them the facts that you have, show them the arguments, quote the experts, and as the Bible would say, to save a few, you might say.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I went ahead and did a brief refutation of the core ideas behind that from the Christian point of view, because the way it was expressed to me was from a supposed Christian who said that I was racist because of my birth, accident of birth. And so I did a refutation of it from Scripture and common sense, but I can sort of understand what you're saying. I mean, I stopped engaging atheists about a year or two ago, because especially those online, because I realized these people don't ask questions with a sincere desire to receive answers.
No.
Because once they receive answers, no matter how factual, no matter how airtight, they just point and laugh and go on and start talking about your quote magical sky daddy. So I can see how you would get to that point where you would just wash your hands of it and just want to concern yourself with people who really want sincere answers, because it's primarily what I've done. So even when I write something or produce a video refuting these sorts of ideas, it's only with the goal in mind of reaching those who are seeking answers and hoping that they will stumble across my information and be dissuaded from the more stupid stuff out there, which, again, you and I know there's lots of it.
Oh, yeah.
So now, if people go to your website, what are they going to find there?
I originally designed it as sort of an encyclopedia fashion. I have an alphabetic index. I have a scripture index. Things are organized by topic or by scripture site. I have a YouTube channel where I make animated videos, and there are a lot of them are simply conversions of the articles that I wrote years before. I have a few links to different items that I've published in the past. I have at least, I believe, 1,000 articles that I wrote over a 10-12 year period between 2000 and 2012, and I've tried to keep them up to date when I can. The website is tektonics.org, and remember to put in .org, because if you put in .com, you'll get this company that builds bridges, and they don't want to tell you about Jesus.
Folks want to get to your website. They can also go to the Expedition Truth page at the kcor.com website. There's a link directly to your ministry website there, so they should have no problem finding you. The videos, I've always wanted to ask you, are you the one who does the art for the animation?
Yes, I do. I've always been interested in cartooning, and first I was going to do some live videos, but then I found out how much trouble that was, and I thought animation would be too difficult, but I have a good friend who was an animator, and he gave me some tips. And although the animation is very primitive, like we're talking like Speed Racer level from the 50s or 60s, it's enough to do the job when it's mostly educational stuff and talking. It'll work. Mm-hmm. They are mostly versions of my articles made somewhat simpler for a YouTube audience. And I do all the art. I am one of the main voices, and I have some people who also help me with some supplemental voices and art as well.
Mm-hmm. All right. One of the videos I told you when we were in break, I told you one of the videos I really liked was, it was a series, you debunking some of the myths about Jesus. One of them in particular I really liked, and that was the Jesus as Mithra story. Yeah. Can you give us a brief run? Yeah, can you give us a brief rundown on that one?
Yeah, that was the first time I tried doing live and realized it was going to be too much trouble. The title of the video was The Mithra Buster, and I dressed myself up as Jamie from the Mythbusters, and my good friend Brent Hardaway dressed himself up as the god Mithra, and he posed as Mithra running for the office of God and saying, hey, vote for me as your god. And he would go about making the claims, and I would just pop up on the side, sort of like Droopy in that old cartoon, and say, well, no, that claim's not true at all. And I explained why it was false, and he'd go get aggravated and try and run away from me and go somewhere else, make another claim. I'd pop up again and refute it. And he finally got so fed up at the end and said, all right, I've had enough. Who are you? And my closing line was, who am I? I'm the Mithra Buster, of course.
It's a really good video, and the information in it is excellent.
Thank you.
It's very good for refuting the Jesus as, is just a copy of Mithra claim, which once you know the truth about Mithra, you know that there is no correlation. Any claim to the contrary is just absurd, and it's just ignorant. But you see it all the time. You really do. What is the most common objection to the Christian faith that you've come across in your ministry, and what was your response to it?
If I had to categorize a common thread, it would be the old, this is so incredible, therefore it didn't happen routine. And that's really just a resurrection of the argument made by David Hume so long ago in the 1700s. If I didn't see it and it's incredible, it didn't happen. And the response to that has always been the same as well, which is, there are many incredible things happening right now. With one of Hume's contemporaries saying, well, what about the tropical prince who has never seen ice? He would think that was incredible and that was impossible, but that it isn't. Mm-hmm. And that made clear that Hume's problem was one of perspective and of knowledge. Just because he, in his limited perspective, doesn't know about these things, doesn't see these things, doesn't make that the universal truth that these things don't happen or aren't the way they are. Mm-hmm. That argument has continued to be resurrected in various forms to this day, and I doubt if we'll ever see the end of it.
Yeah, one of the most absurd ones I see now is the claim that, well, you're only a Christian because of where you live. Mm-hmm. Religion by location.
Well, you were only an atheist because you were born in Cuba. There you go.
Yeah. I mean, that's exactly it. Well, then explain why you're an atheist. Or explain why we've had Christians in India since the 1st century. These ideas are just absurd. It's almost like saying that if you're born in a certain area or you're a certain race, that you can't possibly be any other religion.
Exactly.
It's just a stupid idea. But you see atheists use it a lot, and they think themselves pretty smart for doing so, which is absurd.
Atheists, specialize in stupid, I found.
Yeah, I think so. And hubris.
Yes. Yeah, plenty of that too.
So do you have any other books out there that people can tap into for apologetics?
Yeah, I have quite a few on there, at least a dozen or more. There's set like an encyclopedia of answering biblical contradictions by Scripture site. There's a book on the Trinity, explaining it in simple terms. I have a book on the Atonement, explaining it in terms of first century cultural context. I've got a book on alleged pagan origins of Christmas. That's a lot of fun. I also have a book on conspiracy theories. Yeah, I've been dipping into a lot of different stuff.
Sounds like it.
Yeah.
I'd encourage listeners who are really interested in defending your faith, refuting the absurdities out there, or if you're just interested in educating yourself on the topics just for personal growth, I would encourage you to go to his website, again, tectonics, correct? .org.
Yeah, that's it. TEKTONICS.
Right. You can go to the Expedition Truth page at the KCOR.com website, and you'll find links to JP's website there. I think there's a link to his YouTube channel as well. I'm not sure. But if not, you go to the website, you'll find it. And take advantage of the material there, because it's really good material. And you're probably not likely to find this anywhere else as accessible as it is there. JP, I really appreciate you joining us tonight. Any final thoughts?
Well, in terms of the subject of Hitler, but really in terms of anything, I just encourage people to, when they have questions, to look for answers and look for them in reputable sources. There's always a way to find answers, and it may be made more difficult in some ways because the resources you need aren't readily available. But even if you can't find the answers, there are people who can help you find them out there. There are plenty of biblical scholars who can answer questions, and they are much more willing to answer questions these days than they used to be because of the ease of communication.
Absolutely. Great. Thank you for being on.